For the purpose of this story, we will call the narrator Nolan. It all started with the simple, unspoken rituals of gym culture. He saw the same faces every single day after work at the exact same time. Among the regulars was a man named Josh who stood out for his intensity. Josh always wore tight shirts and carried a large, mysterious duffel bag everywhere. At first, their interaction was limited to polite nods and the occasional, "What's up?" Josh seemed like a friendly guy who just took his lifting very seriously. One afternoon, Nolan was preparing for a set of bench presses when Josh approached him. Josh was working out in the next rack over and asked Nolan for a spot. Nolan agreed without hesitation, thinking it was just standard gym etiquette. Josh was undeniably strong, pushing the heavy bar with focused aggression. After the set was finished, Josh sat up and immediately began a rapid-fire conversation. He asked about Nolan's training split, his work, and where he lived. Nolan kept his answers vague, mentioning only the general area where he resided. Josh laughed loudly, claiming they were practically neighbors as if it were fate. Before the conversation could end, Josh held out his phone and asked for Nolan's Instagram. Thinking nothing of it, Nolan followed him back, assuming it was just a modern way to stay in touch. For the next few weeks, the routine continued, but Josh's presence became more intrusive. Josh would offer unsolicited coaching tips, acting as though he were Nolan's personal mentor. He began sending a constant stream of memes and bodybuilding videos to Nolan's DMs. Nolan would simply react with a laughing emoji, trying to keep a polite distance. One day, Josh messaged him about a local festival and suggested they go together. The event seemed like a harmless town gathering with food trucks and live music. Nolan agreed, figuring a public hangout would be a safe way to test the friendship. When the day of the festival arrived, Nolan met Josh in the early afternoon. Immediately, Nolan noticed that Josh's energy was completely different outside of the gym. He had no sense of volume and greeted Nolan with an aggressive slap on the shoulder. Then, Josh began doing bizarre cartoon voices and switching his tone without warning. He would speak in a high-pitched nasal voice one moment and a deep, scratchy one the next. It wasn't like he was telling jokes, he just seemed unable to help himself. As they got drinks, Josh's behavior became increasingly inappropriate and aggressive. He made shocking comments about random strangers, clearly looking for a reaction. Nolan tried to tell him to calm down, but Josh only responded with a creepy whisper. He would say Nolan's name in a fake spooky tone over and over again. Despite the weirdness, Nolan convinced himself it was just social awkwardness fueled by alcohol. He went home that night thinking Josh was strange, but probably ultimately harmless. However, the messages didn't stop. They became more frequent and more personal. Josh wanted to know every detail of Nolan's daily schedule and gym visits. Nolan began to slow down his responses, hoping the distance would discourage him. He felt a knot in his stomach every time he saw Josh's name appear on his screen. The constant digital pings from Josh had already begun to erode Nolan's sense of peace at home. He decided that meeting in a crowded public place might help reset their dynamic to something more manageable. The local food festival was buzzing with families and the smell of fried dough when Nolan arrived. Josh was already waiting by the main entrance, standing perfectly still while everyone else moved around him. Nolan offered a wave, trying to project a confidence he didn't truly feel in that moment. Josh didn't return the wave, simply tracking Nolan's movement with his eyes until he was inches away. They began to walk through the rows of vendors, but the conversation felt forced and brittle from the start. Josh suddenly stopped at a booth selling handmade jewelry and began staring at the clerk without speaking. When the clerk asked if he needed help, Josh let out a high-pitched, rhythmic clicking sound with his tongue. Nolan quickly pulled him away, apologizing to the confused woman behind the counter. He asked Josh what that was about, but Josh only smiled a wide, empty smile that didn't reach his eyes. As they moved deeper into the crowd, Josh began to mutter under his breath in a voice that sounded like a small child. The tone was mocking and sing-song, repeating words Nolan couldn't quite distinguish over the music. Josh then spotted a group of teenagers laughing nearby, and his entire demeanor shifted instantly. He marched toward them, his steps heavy and deliberate, causing Nolan to lunge for his shoulder. Josh hissed a warning at the boys, a sound that was more animal than human before Nolan could intervene. The teenagers scattered, their laughter replaced by looks of genuine confusion and fear. Nolan demanded to know what was wrong, his patience finally wearing thin in the summer heat. Josh turned to him, his eyes completely vacant, and said they were breathing my air in a deep, gravelly tone. A cold shiver ran down Nolan's spine despite the rising temperature of the afternoon. He tried to suggest that they should head back to their cars and call it a day. Josh ignored the suggestion, instead fixating on a nearby carnival game where a man was ringing a bell. Every time the bell rang, Josh would flinch violently and then giggle like a toddler. People were starting to notice the strange man, and Nolan felt the weight of their judgmental stares. He realized that Josh wasn't just socially awkward. There was something fundamentally broken in how he processed the world. Josh reached out and grabbed Nolan's forearm, his grip surprisingly strong and painful. "We aren't leaving until the sun goes down," Josh stated with a terrifying flat finality. Nolan tried to pull away, but Josh's fingers felt like iron bands around his muscle. He whispered for Josh to let go, scanning the area for a security guard or a police officer. As suddenly as he had grabbed him, Josh released his grip and began humming a distorted version of a nursery rhyme. Nolan knew he had to get away, but he didn't want to trigger another outburst in the middle of a crowd. He watched Josh interact with a balloon artist, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. Josh took the balloon and immediately popped it with his teeth, laughing as the children nearby recoiled. This wasn't the guy from the gym who helped him with his deadlifts. This was a monster wearing a human skin. Nolan waited for a moment when a large group of tourists passed between them to make his move. He turned and sprinted toward the parking lot, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He reached his car and fumbled with the keys, the metal cold and slippery in his sweaty palms. Once inside, he locked the doors and slumped against the steering wheel, gasping for air. He looked up at the rearview mirror and saw a figure standing directly behind his car. It was Josh, his face illuminated by the red glow of the brake lights, and he was using a finger to draw a smiley face in the dust on Nolan's rear window. The realization hit him that no matter how fast he ran, Josh was always going to be exactly where he didn't want him to be. The realization hit me that no matter how fast he ran, Josh was always going to be exactly where he didn't want him to be. After the festival, the messages from Josh didn't just continue, they intensified into a constant stream of check-ins. He would ask what I was doing at every hour of the day, or if I was planning to head to the gym soon. I felt a knot in my stomach every time my phone buzzed, but I tried to convince myself he was just lonely. When he messaged me about going to a bar and mentioned he had invited 2 girls, it sounded like a normal social plan. I figured that having other people there would dilute the intensity of his strange behavior. I arrived at the bar downtown on Saturday night, feeling a mix of social obligation and genuine curiosity. As soon as I stepped inside, the smell of stale beer and loud music hit me instantly. I spotted Josh sitting at a corner table, and I could tell immediately that he had started drinking long before I arrived. He had that glassy-eyed look and a grin that felt way too wide for the occasion. I sat down and looked around, but there was no sign of the 2 girls he had mentioned. 10 minutes passed, then 20, and the table remained just the 2 of us. When I finally asked where his friends were, he just shrugged and said they had bailed at the last minute. The way he said it felt like a practiced lie, as if the girls never existed in the first place. I realized then that he had manipulated me into a one-on-one meeting, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. Without warning, Josh leaned in close and started doing those disturbing cartoon voices again. He was doing a high-pitched, nasally squeak, followed by a deep, guttural growl that didn't sound human. He wasn't even telling a joke. He was just making these sounds while staring directly into my eyes. I noticed a couple at the next table, whispering and looking at us with expressions of pity and judgment. I tried to lower my voice and tell him to chill out, but he only seemed to get louder and more animated. He began a fake, hysterical laugh that sounded like a movie villain, drawing even more attention to our corner. Then he started repeating my name over and over in a low, rhythmic chant that sent shivers down my spine. "Nolan, Nolan, listen to me, Nolan," he whispered, his eyes never blinking once. I felt physically small in that booth, as if the walls of the bar were closing in on us. He ordered more shots and became aggressive when I refused to drink with him. He did a voice like a crying baby, mocking my hesitation and calling me boring in front of the whole room. I couldn't take another second of his unstable energy, so I pulled out my phone to make an excuse. I told him my brother had an emergency and I needed to leave right away. Josh's face transformed instantly from manic laughter to a cold, frightening mask of anger. He didn't say a word, but he watched me with an intensity that felt like he was memorizing my every move. I mumbled a quick "see you at the gym" and turned my back on him as fast as I could. The cool night air felt like a benediction as I stepped out onto the sidewalk. I decided right then that my friendship with Josh was officially over. The following Monday, I went to the gym with a plan to keep my head down and avoid him entirely. I was re-racking some weights when I felt a presence directly behind me, far closer than social norms allowed. "What's up, Nolan?" Josh whispered, his breath hitting the back of my neck. He acted as if the night at the bar had never happened, his tone bright and overly cheerful. He followed me from the bench to the cable machines, talking incessantly despite my one-word answers. It was like he had claimed ownership of me, and every attempt to distance myself only made him cling harder. I began checking the parking lot before I even left the building, terrified of seeing his car behind mine. I stopped responding to his digital presence entirely, blocking his updates and silencing his notifications. One night, the silence of my bedroom was broken by a sound that made my blood run cold. A low, distorted voice, unmistakably Josh's, began whispering my name from just inches away outside my window. The social awkwardness had officially ended, and a nightmare was beginning right in my own backyard. The social awkwardness had officially ended, and a nightmare was beginning right in my own backyard. I tried to convince myself that blocking him at the bar was the end of the story. It was a particularly hot summer night, so I had left my bedroom window cracked open just a few inches. The oscillating fan on my dresser provided a steady hum that usually helped me sleep. Suddenly, a sound pierced through the white noise of the fan. It was a low, drawn-out voice that sounded intentionally theatrical and creepy. The voice whispered my name into the night air, dragging out every syllable like a threat. I froze, listening so hard that I could hear my own heart hammering against my ribs. The voice stopped as abruptly as it had started, leaving only the sound of the wind. I crept toward the window and peered through the tiny gaps in the blinds. I couldn't see anyone, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. In a moment of panic, I whispered, "Josh," out into the darkness. There was no answer, only a heavy, suffocating silence that made my skin crawl. I backed away from the window and grabbed my phone, my hands shaking uncontrollably. A terrifying question hit me. How did he even find out where I live? I decided to confront him directly and sent a message asking if he was outside. I watched the screen, waiting for those little typing bubbles to appear. The message was marked as seen almost immediately, but the minutes ticked by without a reply. Finally, a single word popped up on the screen: no. It was too simple, too defensive, and it only made me more certain it was him. I didn't sleep at all that night, jumping at every creak of the floorboards. The next night, the horror returned, but this time it was further back in the yard. That same fake, creepy voice drifted through the darkness, calling my name again. This time, I didn't whisper. I marched to the window and slammed the glass shut. I turned my fan to its highest setting, desperate to drown out any further sounds. I sent him a final warning, threatening to call the police if he ever came back. I blocked his account immediately, hoping that cutting the connection would end the obsession. But as I lay there, I realized that blocking someone on a screen doesn't remove them from your yard. A morbid curiosity forced me to look out the window one last time. Through the gaps in the blinds, I saw a tall, dark figure standing just inches from the glass. The shadow was so close that it obscured the faint light from the street lamp. I screamed at the top of my lungs, telling the monster to get out and stay away. The figure shifted suddenly, disappearing into the blackness of the trees. I stood there shaking, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I waited for a sound. Every night after that was a battle against my own mind. I stopped going to my gym entirely, terrified that he would see my routine and follow me again. 3 weeks passed with no sign of him, and I finally began to let my guard down. That sense of peace was shattered when I found my rear tire completely flat. I crouched down and saw the jagged, clean slice in the sidewall. It had been slashed. I looked up and down the empty street, feeling his eyes on me from some hidden vantage point. He wasn't just watching me anymore, he was starting to sabotage my life. I realized then that a restraining order wouldn't be enough to stop someone this obsessed. As I called for a tow truck, I saw a flash of red in a neighbor's window that didn't belong there. The nightmare wasn't over. It was just moving into a much more violent phase. My name is Luis, and I have lived in a quiet Kansas town for nearly 14 years. For the last 4 years, I have worked a steady job at a local Mexican restaurant. Every single day after work, I meet my friend Colton at the gym to lift weights. Colton is a few years younger than me, a chill guy who grew up in the country. Last summer, Colton was coming off a very toxic 4-month relationship with a girl named Addie. Addie was extremely possessive and hated that Colton spent so much time at the gym with me. He finally broke it off after finding out she had been cheating on him with multiple people. One Tuesday night, we arrived at the gym around 7 o'clock as usual. Just as we started our first set, the front door swung open and a girl walked in. She was wearing a bright red hoodie and dark blue leggings. Instead of heading for a machine, she just stood there staring directly at us. She didn't look around the room or check her phone like a normal person would. Eventually, she started walking toward the women's locker room, but her head remained turned toward us. Colton didn't think much of it, assuming she was just being weird, but I felt a pit in my stomach. A few minutes later, a strange sound drifted out from the locker room doors. It was a mixture of soft crying and rapid, unintelligible whispering. The sound was so loud that it actually pierced through the music in our headphones. It didn't sound like someone who was hurt. It sounded like someone who was breaking down mentally. We tried to ignore it and focus on our training, but the atmosphere had changed completely. About 10 minutes passed before she finally emerged from the locker room. She was still wearing the exact same red hoodie and leggings, which made no sense. People usually go into the locker room to change into workout gear, but she hadn't moved a muscle. She began to drift around the gym floor without touching a single piece of equipment. Every few seconds, she would drift closer and closer to where we were standing. She was hovering so close that I could practically feel her presence behind me. I told Colton that I was getting really uncomfortable and that we needed to move. We switched to a machine on the far end of the gym, and for a moment, she seemed to vanish. I noticed a car sitting in the far corner of the parking lot with its headlights blindingly bright. It felt wrong because the only other people in the gym had left in a different truck minutes earlier. We brushed it off as just another weird occurrence and drove our separate ways home. About 10 minutes after I got home, my phone buzzed with a text from Colton. He asked me if I remembered that strange girl in the red hoodie from earlier. Then he sent a follow-up message that made my heart stop. What if it was Addie? The thought of Colton's unstable ex-girlfriend stalking us in disguise was sickening. I told him there was no way it was her, and that we were just letting the gym story get to us. We eventually convinced ourselves it was a coincidence, and I tried to go to sleep around 11:30 p.m. Suddenly, a sharp, rhythmic knocking echoed from my brother's bedroom window down the hall. I crept toward the window to look outside, but the backyard was a sea of empty shadows. Just as I turned away, a much more aggressive banging began at my own front door. The doorknob started shaking violently as if someone was trying to rip it right off the hinges. Then, from the other side of the wood, I heard a high-pitched, hysterical laughter. It wasn't a normal laugh, it was the sound of someone who had completely lost their mind. I realized with a sudden, freezing dread that the girl in the red hoodie hadn't been a stranger at all. She was here, she was armed, and the night was just beginning to turn truly violent. The heavy silence of the night was shattered by a rhythmic, aggressive knocking on the glass. I froze in place, my breath catching as the sound moved from my brother's room to my own window. Suddenly, the front door began to rattle as if someone were trying to rip the handle off. A high-pitched, hysterical laughter erupted from the other side of the wood. My phone vibrated on the nightstand, the screen illuminating the dark room with a harsh white glow. I grabbed the device and read a message accusing me of ruining her life. A second message arrived, and my heart plummeted into my stomach. The realization that Addie was outside with a weapon sent me into a cold sweat. I crept toward my father's room, keeping low to avoid being seen through any windows. My father was already awake, holding his own phone with a grim expression. He mouthed the words that the police were on their way and told me to stay back. Outside, the laughter had turned into a low, guttural chanting of my name. We heard the crunch of gravel as she moved from the door back toward the side of the house. Every second felt like an hour, as we waited for the sound of sirens. Blue and red lights finally began to flash against the living room walls. I peeked through the blinds just in time to see several officers rushing onto the lawn. Addie didn't run. She simply sat down in the grass, dropping the knife beside her. The police shouted commands, their voices echoing through the quiet neighborhood. They tackled her gently but firmly, pinning her arms behind her back. As they led her to the cruiser, she turned back and blew a kiss toward my window. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding as the car doors slammed shut. Later that night, I sat with Colton on the phone, trying to make sense of the madness. He swore he never gave her my address, which only made the situation more terrifying. If she could find me without help, it meant I was never truly hidden. The gym, once a place of self-improvement, now felt like a hunting ground for the unstable. Weeks passed, and the court case began to unfold, revealing the depth of her obsession. I couldn't bring myself to return to our usual workout spot for a long time. Addie was eventually placed in a psychiatric facility for evaluation. Even behind locked doors, I still felt the weight of her stare in my memories. I started checking my car every morning, looking for signs that I was being watched again. The peace of our small Kansas town had been permanently tainted for me. Every time a girl in a hoodie walked past me, my heart skipped a beat. But as one nightmare ended, another was quietly beginning for someone else in a different part of the city. Far across town, a 25-year-old man was just starting his evening workout at an LA Fitness. He felt a prickle on the back of his neck, the unmistakable sensation of being observed. In the reflection of the squat rack mirror, a new figure sat motionless on a distant machine. This stranger wasn't lifting weights. He was simply staring, waiting for the right moment. The man at the rack tried to focus on his set, but his eyes kept drifting back to the mirror. When he looked up for the final time, the stranger was gone, leaving only an empty seat and a sense of dread. He didn't know it yet, but the trail he was about to run tomorrow would lead him straight into a trap. For months, I had been a regular at the local LA Fitness, settling into a comfortable evening routine after work. I started noticing a new face among the regulars, a man who didn't seem to follow any recognizable workout plan. During my leg days, I would catch his reflection in the mirror, sitting on the chest press machine directly behind me. He wasn't even using the equipment. He just sat there with his elbows on his knees, staring in my direction. Whenever our eyes met through the glass, he would quickly look away, as if preoccupied with something else. A few days later, I saw him again on the lat pull-down machine, but the weight stack never moved an inch. One night, I caught him holding his phone at chest height, angled perfectly to record my workout. The moment I turned around to confront him with a stare, He lowered the device and vanished into the locker room. No matter where I moved in the facility, he always managed to find a seat with a clear line of sight to me. I went to refill my water bottle and nearly collided with him as he stood silently around a blind corner. Feeling hunted, I decided to switch my schedule to late nights, hoping the change would lose him. For the first few nights, the gym was quiet and he was nowhere to be found, allowing me to breathe again. That weekend, while out with friends at a crowded downtown bar, I turned around and saw the same face. He was sitting by the wall in a dark jacket, staring directly at me through the sea of people. I told my friends we had to leave immediately, feeling the weight of his gaze following us to the door. 2 weeks passed without a sighting, but the sense of being watched never truly left me. I decided to take a run at the local nature preserve, a long dirt trail surrounded by thick woods. 10 minutes into my run, I noticed a figure jogging about 50 yards behind me. I realized that no matter how much I adjusted my pace, the distance between us remained perfectly identical. When I sped up to a near sprint, I heard the heavy thud of his footsteps accelerate in perfect unison. I glanced back and saw the man in the baseball hat, his head down, mirroring my every move. Adrenaline flooded my system as I remembered a small dirt exit path leading up to a residential street. I banked hard into the narrow trail, my lungs burning as I pushed my body to its absolute limit. Behind me, I heard him break into a full, desperate sprint, the sound of his breathing getting closer. I reached the edge of the woods and burst onto the paved street, screaming for help at the top of my lungs. A man standing in his driveway across the road looked over immediately, alerted by my cries. The stranger from the gym skidded to a halt at the edge of the trail, hesitating as he saw the witness. He stared at me for one last chilling second before spinning around and disappearing back into the dark woods. I collapsed onto the pavement, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The man from the driveway stayed with me until the police arrived, but the forest was vast and the stalker was gone. I never returned to that LA Fitness again, canceling my membership the very next morning. I joined a gym across town and changed my entire daily routine to be less predictable. This experience has left me permanently looking over my shoulder whenever I'm in public. We often think of gyms as safe spaces of self-improvement, but they can also be hunting grounds for the obsessed. Josh, Addie, and the silent man in the hat all proved that a simple hello can sometimes be the start of a nightmare. The trauma of these encounters doesn't just vanish once the police are called or the blocks are set. It lives in the way you check your locks 3 times before bed and the way you scan every face in a crowd. I'm safe now, but I know that shadows in the gym aren't always cast by the equipment. Keep your head up, stay aware of your surroundings, and never ignore that gut feeling that something isn't right. Because in the end, the only person truly responsible for your safety is you.